Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you're here today. My name is Lisa Hunter. I'm the Associate Vice President of Academic Innovation and Transformation. And I'm proud and so happy to offer a warm welcome from AASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. And we are ready to talk data with you today. We have been working on this course scheduling, student-centered course scheduling initiative here at ASCU for a number of years, and we have learned a lot. And if you've been with us in previous webinars, this is the third of our four-part webinar series as we have been releasing hopefully some very meaningful and helpful resources for you all to help you do this work on your campuses. And today we are releasing our data guide that we are so proud of. And we have assembled a lot of subject matter experts and our primary author with us today to kind of talk us through it. But we have a couple of warm-up questions because we'd like to kind of see where you all are at for those of you who are joining us. So we have a poll that we'd like to launch now for our first warm-up question. So you'll see that coming up on your screen soon. What is your primary goal for course scheduling reform? And you should have 4 choices to choose from. And I'm gonna let Samantha kind of gauge responses. And Samantha, whenever you're ready to share the results, you'll let us see that.
We're getting close. I'll give just a few more seconds for folks to respond, and then we'll end this poll so we can see the results. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So we've got let's see, in the lead is increased scheduling predictability, and then second, improving on-time completion, third, increased retention, and then the last there at 11% was improve instructional capacity. Awesome. So thank you all for offering that. And then we've got another warm-up question. Which of these do you currently believe to be true? We've got a few more options for you. We don't have enough seats in required courses. We need more classrooms or laboratory spaces. Registration frustration is continuing to contributing to stopouts or lower credit loads. Students are taking lighter credit loads by choice. We need more faculty to meet student demand. And the last one, students can follow our published degree plans.
And on this one, you can select multiple. So if there are a couple, I think Elizabeth was saying the same thing. If there's a couple that resonate with you, feel free to select more than one.
I can imagine a scenario where all of the above.
A few more seconds since this one was a little longer. All right.
Let's see where we came in. Okay. Interesting. So registration frustration contributing to stopouts or lower credit loads. And then we don't have enough seats in required courses. Interesting. Okay, well, I think that probably every single one of these is going to come up today in our conversation as we talk about how we use data to inform student-centered scheduling. I mentioned in the beginning that we've been at this work for a number of years, and we've been fortunate to have incredible thought partners. Our friends at Ascendium Education Foundation have been supporting now. This is the second cohort. We started the work in 2022 with 11 institutions. And then we've been expanding that work, now working with 20 institutions. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago, we added 12 more institutions in a shorter kind of project, still focused on student-centered course scheduling. So we have built up a wealth of knowledge and I think resource to that informs what we've been sharing in these past few webinars. So really happy to have that support from Ascendium for this resource in particular, as well as the thought partnership and leadership from the Ad Astra team, Laura Hunter and Lena Swaco. And then, of course, my colleagues at AASCU, Samantha Rayner, who is our program manager. She's on today, kind of leading us through, and she's going to be working us through the Q&A. She's also our lead curriculum and learning designer, and she serves as an institutional coach through our program as well. And then I'd like you to meet our design partner for the guide today, Elizabeth Cameron from Friday Communications. Part of making any resource valuable and helpful to institutions is, of course, the design and the way that folks are able to interact with it. And so I think you're going to see that they have done a fabulous job bringing the resource today to fruition and being able to help you adapt it and use it on your campuses. So we're really excited. And then our subject matter experts, along with Laura today, and joining us from Texas A&M San Antonio is Dwayne Williams, who is Associate Vice Provost for Student Success and Retention. And from the University of North Georgia, Steve Lloyd, Vice Provost, and Eugene Van Sickle, Associate Provost for Undergraduate Programs. And both of these institutions and these three gentlemen are members of our 20 institution cohort that I was speaking of. So to kick things off, I'd like to ask Laura, Laura, if you could, over the last several years of working with the cohort, could you talk to us about some of the takeaways or some of the observations we've had on the team in terms of using data to inform student-centered scheduling and applying it on campuses?
So thanks, Lisa, and welcome everyone. Excited to have this conversation today and looking forward to diving into the data guide. I'm a little bit biased, but maybe this is my favorite webinar where we're talking about data today. So we're excited to talk about some of the themes. One of the things that we've noticed as we worked with the cohorts as well as institutions across the country is that most people have data available to them. And so the challenge usually isn't about getting the data as much as it is about knowing what the data means, how to interpret it, how to connect it to your goals, and then what are the additional questions that you might want to ask along the way. And so what you see here on your screen are some of the things that we've learned and some of maybe the cautionary tales that we want to be sure that you're thinking of as you're diving in and looking at this in a little bit more detail. So, the same number can mean opposite things. So while in some cases we're looking at courses that are completely full, does that mean that you need additional sections of that course? Or are we seeing some institutional preferences associated with days and times? Looking at averages in some ways are great to be able to triage what's happening at an institution, but that disaggregation down to individual levels can really help you be able to pinpoint what's happening. Constraints or things that we believe to be happening, and some of these are examples, are we out of space? So we've been doing this for over 500 institutions, and I will tell you that almost every institution says we are out of space in some way. But the data doesn't bear that out because it's not true across the board. Usually there's something at play. Are we constricting into short windows of time? Are there particular rooms or types or features or sizes that are at play? And you really have to dive a little bit deeper in order to figure that out. And then finally, the data tells us something. So as I've been consulting over the years, usually what I say is we're not giving you the answer to the question, we're giving you the questions that you need to be asking. And I really think that's a core feature of what we're doing here is as we look at this data, what does that mean in the context of something else? And we hope that the data guide is a way for you to be able to think through that to be able to test what you know about data, and then be able to use it on your campus as a way to have good conversations and questions along the way. So I'm going to hop into the data guide, but I want to talk to you just briefly about what we're doing here. So we've organized it, and I want to echo Lisa's comments about Elizabeth from Friday, because she did a great job of organizing this work and helping us think through the best way to present it to you. And so we're doing it in 3 ways, around looking at individual metrics, looking at goals, and looking at the hypotheses that you might want to be able to test. And so with that, I'm going to switch gears here and share my screen, and hopefully this will all work easily enough. Okay, is that coming through for everyone now? Excellent. So you can see here at the top, this is our live course scheduling data guide, and you can see that we do have those 3 areas here. And so you can see that you can choose to use any one of those. It's going to pop you to that point in the page. And so I'm just kind of highlighting some of that along the way. And so hopefully from a navigation perspective, that allows you to start where you are most interested in looking at the data. My favorite part are these hypotheses, and we're going to come back to that in a moment, but just know that I think that's a great way to be able to think through some of the things that we talked about as we went through those polling questions along the way. So today, as we dive in, what we're going to do is look at the key metrics associated with 3 buckets. And so what we selected there are course offerings, we're looking at capacity, and we're looking at student outcomes. And we feel like those 3 things help to tell the picture around the course scheduling perspective. Are there other metrics that are available? 100%, but those are the key buckets that we wanted to talk through along the way. So before we dive into the metrics, I wanted our campus leads to be able to tell us a little bit about their institutions, just so that you can have the perspective of how they were attacking data, how they were thinking through it in the context of their institution. So Steve and Jean might have to fight for who's going to talk about University of North Georgia. We'll let them draw straws and figure that out. And then Dwayne, if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your institution, and then we'll let our colleagues from UNG do the same thing.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and thank you for the opportunity. So, from Texas A&M San Antonio, we are a growing institution. We just crossed 8,000 students 2 years ago. We've just launched our first doctoral program for this fall, and we're growing not only in student numbers but also in terms of our infrastructure. So. We've been around we're the second newest in the A&M system, and a lot of the challenges are growing pains. As you mentioned, in terms of really creating awareness around the challenges and really bursting myths regarding what is or isn't has been an interesting process for myself, working with the different stakeholders regarding student-centered course scheduling and its importance in terms of getting the student outcomes that we all are striving for. So it's been a process, but it's been a great learning process in terms of understanding where we are as an institution and what abilities we have through utilizing the data. So I think the data for me in terms of helping folks understand what are the areas that we can improve has been one of my focus, and also helping to give context as to why some of the challenges that students are facing are actually continuing to occur. So that has been kind of where I've sat navigating the faculty challenges and constraints, but also managing that against the need for improved student outcomes from our different stakeholders. I don't know if you want me to go further in, but that's kind of like the broad-based version.
That's great, Dwayne. Let's move to Steve and Jean and let them do the same thing, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the metrics themselves.
Okay.
Thanks, Laura. Jean Van Sickle again, Associate Provost for undergraduate programs. University of North Georgia is one of 25 institutions in the university system of Georgia. We are a product of a consolidation that happened a bit more than a decade ago. We have experienced rapid growth since then. We are now 5 physical campuses plus online for select programs. We have more than 20,000 students that we serve, and we offer programs from certificates to doctoral degrees. So we are a complicated institution, and we've found many of the things that you were pointing out in your overall observations, Laura. And we were trying to answer many of these same types of questions that you asked in the poll at the start of this. We thought we had capacity challenges, particularly when it came to required courses in our core curriculum. We're trying to figure out how to manage faculty resources across 5 campuses and serve all these different types of degree levels. And so it becomes an increasingly complicated, almost a math problem, trying to balance all of these things. And so having good data, which we didn't have when we started this, is critical. And I want to point to something that you were talking about, right? Where you look, right? It really helped us focus in, right, where we should be looking to try to answer some of these questions. Right. I'll toss it to Steve if he has anything to add.
That's perfect, Gene. Thanks.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the course offering metrics that are available. And so you can see at the top of each one of these areas, there's some information about why course offerings are something that we think are important and why the metrics are related. You can see some interesting data points, not just from Ad Astra data, but across the nation. There was a great Instructure survey that has a lot of data points around the trouble that students have in terms of registering. You can see that from the Journal of Public Economics that students who are shut out of courses are less likely, or I'm sorry, more likely to take 0 courses in that term. And so those are some of the things where course scheduling is usually not the only reason that students don't either retain or complete, but it is a component that's at play. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the metrics that are in this category. And would any of you want to just highlight some of the things that you looked at as a part of this, some of the data that has helped you be able to move the needle on course scheduling relative to course offerings themselves?
I can jump in on that one, Laura. Of this section, well, it's just Steve and I have paid attention a lot to overloaded course ratio, enrollment ratios. But as of late, we've been paying a lot of attention to the late adds. We were in a cycle for quite a while of adding sections late because we hadn't put out an appropriate number of courses, right, to serve the students, our current students, but then incoming students. And we seem to be caught in this really vicious cycle as a result of that. And so we've been putting a lot of attention in this area and focusing on how do we, right, change that dynamic. This is where you have to bring in your enrollment management team, right? You have to start looking at, right, allocation of resources, your budget, and so forth. And because when you're adding in a reactionary mode, you're giving students really less than ideal schedules, right? And we advance schedule our incoming students. And so it was increasingly difficult for us to get them a full-time schedule, right? So we were trying to solve multiple problems here, right? And so that data point in particular was important for us. And I think Steve will agree with this, but as a result of what we've been doing, we've made good progress in this particular area for this coming fall. There's still work to do, but we've gotten better as a result of paying attention to this type of metric.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, again, and what I love about the way the guide is created is you're talking about something that's a good thing, reacting to the demand. But ultimately, the sooner that you can do that, the better for everyone. Understanding where you have consistently been adding sections and maybe doing that ahead of time helps both from a faculty capacity lens, but also really important for students. We have situations where students go in to register, they look to see if a course is available, they don't get it, they register for something else. They often don't go back and determine if that seat that may have been more important to them is available. And so that's a great illustration of a particular, looking at a metric and kind of all of the tentacles that it has. And how important that is. Dwayne, what about you from a course offerings perspective? Are there any of these metrics that really stand out in your mind?
Certainly. The wait list, as well as the overload course ratio. Those are two that I've been paying attention to. We could start with the wait list. For us, one of the things that I looked at was there's a part of the script that asked whether the wait list is really addressing demand versus student preference. And I think it's interesting because at our institution, I think, the wait list will go out daily. We have a report, and chairs will try to address it based on what the student, is asking for. Um, uh, but then I also realized in that process that there isn't a standard definition or guide as to how chairs and deans are supposed to utilize the wait list. And what has been the case up until recent is that folks would hear the alarm bells and they would try to address students on the wait list, not realizing that it's a continuous process throughout the enrollment cycle. And we have the wait list structured in a way that it actually will show students who are not enrolled in any courses. And so those students are saying to us that I'm not enrolled in any courses. Here is whether it's a preference or just I need to get into class. And it allows us to really question how we are actually meeting the needs of student, whether early in the enrollment cycle or towards the end. And we've seen cases where students have signaled to us that, hey, I'm in need of, online courses. So it's a preference. And even though we can't meet all the preferences, I do think we have to try to balance or at least be transparent with students what we can offer. And so I think we have an opportunity at our institution to develop some kind of guideline, if not policy, around what is the purpose of a waitlist and how frequent should we be monitoring it, which I think we should be monitoring it throughout the enrollment cycle. But the other piece which came through as I was reading is if we actually have open seats, can a student join the wait list? For our institution, we allow that, which means we're saying to the student, just tell us your preference, even though we might not be able to meet it. And so I think that actually was very key for me. It's a key insight because now I have to go back to the group and say, what's our stance in this case? Because we're allowing students to join a wait list even if we have seats open. And so faculty are looking at that like, hey, I have all these seats in person open, but the student is waiting for an online section. And so if we're not going to be able to meet that need, I think our systems need to reflect our capacities, so to speak. So it's allowing more questions for us, at least for me, from where I sit. And I think that's an opportunity for us. As it relates to the overload course ratio, we've actually been trending in the opposite way. It says our benchmark should be less than 10%. And since 2022, we've gone from 23% to, as of this coming fall, 27%. And so, I look at all the things we've been doing to increase semester credit production and all the work that faculty have done to get students in courses. And so while we're trending away from the benchmark, I also then have to question the tipping point in terms of our capacity, because while we've grown in student numbers, we haven't changed our infrastructure, both physically and on the faculty end. So I think these are the things that I'm mentioning to our president and to our provost as we're discussing all of the challenges to be mindful of if and when we do hit a tipping point with our capacity.
So Dwayne, appreciate those comments, and I think it's so telling. So to your point, knowing where you are and where it stands in relationship to the benchmark and the direction that those metrics are taking over time is really important. And you've had a big emphasis on your campus to increase student credit hours per term, and so of course that means you're going to have more enrollment in certain ones of those bottlenecked courses. I know Gene and Steve have the same experience where lots of those courses are really full, and like how do we manage that? There was a question in the chat that was about, hey, we're on the opposite end. It's not so much that we have some of the late ads. Instead, we have some of the course cancellations that are at play. And so all of these metrics are really designed to help you pinpoint those types of things. And the picture for your institution might be a little bit different than what they see at UNG or at Texas A&M San Antonio. And using the metrics together and figuring out how they play out is something that's important. Let's transition and talk a little bit about some of the capacity related metrics and how that plays out. Oftentimes, capacity metrics are ways to be able to think through what's available. If we're going to respond to some of the things that we're seeing in course offerings, are we able to do that or not? So, Steve, I don't know if you would want to share anything specifically about capacity and some of the metrics that you all have used at UNG.
Sure, thanks, Laura. I think I'll point to, we use all of the metrics, by the way, but I think I'll point to two in particular, primetime compression and seat fill utilization. And let me start with primetime compression, that idea that you are scheduling more in primetime than you are during the standard week. And let me then flip to seat fill utilization. This idea, how are you matching room size to course cap or course need, right? I think together, both of these metrics have pointed to us the problems with our completely decentralized scheduling process, and what is contributing to barriers to student access to courses may not be so much what space we have, it's how we're using it. And we have a bit of an archaic allocation process. So in-house, what we're doing now is taking a step back, thinking about our inventory, trying to understand more about that inventory towards creating a better allocation system. And with that should ideally, hopefully come with some centralized scheduling that we haven't done to date to better spread that day, to better match rooms with the course needs, et cetera. So for us, we have to do this 5 times. So it becomes even more important because you are always going to have a little bit of waste. You're always going to have a little bit of extra capacity. But when you multiply that times 5, it becomes pretty unacceptable relatively quickly.
Yeah, it's so telling and a great illustration of how using the metrics together can be at play. Something that Dwayne mentioned about, enrollment in online versus on-ground classes and trying to figure out that balance too is something that's really interested. Although we didn't even include modality mix as a metric that's listed here. So appreciate that. Dwayne, on your side, anything from a capacity perspective that's sticking out for you?
Yep. So, you've heard me say that our primetime utilization has constantly gone up. We're now roughly around 78%, and the goal is around 80%. However, our compression also is heading in the wrong direction, so to speak. And by wrong, I mean according to the benchmark. But the context behind it is everything I described in terms of us growing as an institution and having more students, increased SCH. We've seen that our compression has constantly gone up. And so again, the question is, as I looked through this, or the primetime utilization and the standard week utilization, it really suggests that if those two things are high, you may have a space constraint. Now, I didn't need the data to tell me that. I anecdotally, from speaking to folks in our academic arm, I've heard these things, and I could see what's also going on just from my own experience. We've just begun using the class optimization arm of Ad Astra, and one of the things that came from that was a discussion between the deans regarding who has access to certain rooms and how are these things being scheduled. And so we're going this fall from a more manual to an automated process in terms of room assignments. And so the goal is that we will have a discussion about whether or not the space we have is being maximized in its best way possible, or we just did not have a good process in order to distribute the spreading of courses across campus. And so I think the terminologies here are helping me to give somewhat of a description of what is going on or what students are experiencing, what faculty may be challenged with in terms of I want to increase capacity, but I'm stuck in a room that doesn't allow for that. Meanwhile, down the hall, there is the complete inverse. And so I think people know that, but we have not been able to have a system prior to this that could help us articulate where are the pain points. And so I think we've just had that conversation over the last, I would say, 6 months, knowing that we're now going to use the class optimization piece. So TBD in terms of what that will bring about, but I'm hopeful that we will see improved space utilization.
And I want to call attention. Nina has a question in the chat that's related to this around how do you deal with this seat fill utilization when divisions control rooms and there's no appetite on campus to change it? So it sounds like this is something you all are dealing with of like, it's been decentralized, we're trying to centralize. How have you started building buy-in and support for that?
I mean, you know, as I kind of alluded to, our deans had to have a conversation about who has ownership or rights and based on what parameters. So there has to be a conversation across the academic units. And once that conversation is had, then you can start scripting what are the priorities in terms of classroom assignment. That was the first part for us. We'll see how it plays out because then you get into the politics of who wants a classroom based on seniority or not and close to their office. So there's that conversation, but the primary conversation is what is needed and what's the priority that we're all agreeing upon. Then we can impart that within our tool in order to kind of meet those priorities. So conversation at the top level first, and then you kind of go from there. At least that's what we've done.
Yeah. And so, Steve, I don't know if you want to weigh in as well. I know you all have talked a lot over time about the importance of kind of the shared language, and then being able to use that to bring change about on your campus. So, do you want to answer that from your perspective as well?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think I'll end up echoing a lot of what Dwayne said. But at the same time, Nina, when you find the answer, you'll be a millionaire. So just share it back with us. I'll pay for it. It's really a culture or a change management process, I believe. And so all those principles apply. As Dwayne said, for us, what we've done is I think we could have moved very fast on this. Gene and I understood the problems. We dug down to the root causes. We identified what some potential solutions were, but it can't stop there. As Dwayne said, you need to engage individuals, and it's a very slow process for us. We have been in these conversations for over a year, but we have worked closely with small teams and expanded those teams over time in very intentional ways and at very intentional times. For the purposes of them studying, wrestling with the data, learning more about the problems and the solutions, and building ultimately that buy-in. At some point, I think when you do get to the academic department level, that's where the Band-Aid gets ripped off, right? These are the individuals, as you say, at many institutions that have control of the scheduling practices. And that certainly truly is a challenge. One piece of advice that I'd share that Gene and I have had some success with is not making the problems personal. It's not about a given department's problem that they've created. You may even couch it in the light of, we know that you're doing a great job supporting your students and your majors and your programs. And for us, it's that call to take a step back, look at the schedule more globally. And that's what most of the academic departments don't have to do, right? They're focused in on the courses that they offer. They don't have to always consider the courses that others offer. And the encouragement is for them to take that step back because the global picture of the schedule looks very, very different than the individual department's schedule. And that's where we have had some luck in getting them to think more about the general education curriculum and how really our focus and effort is not on disrupting their majors or their programs, but how do we serve students across multiple programs in this kind of way. So just a few thoughts for you as you step into that process.
So I love that answer so much. And I want to harken back to one of the previous webinars that we did about surveying your faculty. And I think one of the approaches that I think is so great is listening to their concerns. So it may not be that you can do anything about those concerns, but at least listening to their perspectives and why they want that space and those types of things. And then again, using the data to have a conversation about whether to your point, Steve, if you need this space to be able to offer this general education class, then it gives a different perspective than just they know where you're coming from as opposed to you're being arbitrary and trying to take a room away. And so I think that's really helpful. So let's keep going here. What's exciting to me is it's important to talk about course offerings as well as capacity, but student outcomes is really the why that we're all working for. And so you can see this quote from the student who says that they're going to spend 4 years at a community college to get a 2-year degree. And so, and some of the questions early on. So do we believe our students can follow our pathways? Only about 15% of you said that was true. Are our students experiencing registration frustration? 51%. So we know that there are issues associated with scheduling, and how does that lead to issues from a student outcomes perspective? So same thing here. I don't know, Jean, if you want to talk first here about, something from a student outcomes and measurements perspective that has been important as you all have been looking at this data.
Sure, Laura. So just to start, like all of these matter, right? And you should be paying attention to all of those metrics. The one that really stood out when we started this process, that was degree velocity, right? That was just a different way of looking at this issue of student progression. And so that one really jumped out at Steve and I. And I think the really important part of this is it gave us a different language that we could use to engage, right, our stakeholders and have a conversation around the schedule itself and how it can promote, right, student velocity, right, so earning, right, productive credits, in their degree program. And so that has, I don't know, it's for that one, I think really became sort of an anchor that we could latch onto, a centering piece of data, right, to organize the work around. And so that was, I think, a critical leap for us as an institution when we started having that conversation. Beyond that, the one that I'm more interested in now is a pathway alignment, which I think is in a different section. But because I know that from the data that we've been able to gain, I know we have issues there, right? And so this, like I said at the beginning, right? It compounds, right? And you peel back these layers. Steve likes to talk about this being an onion, and the layers of the onion that we keep peeling back. But I start to connect these things, and so I'm thinking about pathway alignment. And if our pathways are not aligned well, then what does that do to program velocity? Right. So you have to scaffold these things, I think, in order to make the kind of progress on the student success metrics that are important to the institution and have real consequences. Dwayne referenced this earlier, like credit hour production. you're talking about the financial health of the institution and being able to continue serve, right? Students serve your region, right? And so forth. So all these things need to work together. You have to target which thing you're going to focus on trying to move.
So I love this around pathway schedule alignment. So we've quoted this before, 26% of required courses across the institutions that we work with aren't offered in the term that's listed on the pathway. And that seems like something that's a self-inflicted wound. That's something that we can attack and work on. I understand that not all students are following their pathways and there's dual credit and people get off track and, there's lots of caveats. But ultimately, I think there are ways for us to just get a little bit better at this. Same thing, like no one intends for these things to happen, but oftentimes we build our pathways separately from the schedule and we really don't do these checks. And so having the discipline to make sure that we are checking to see how that plays out is something that's important. But Dwayne, let's go back to you from a student outcomes perspective and talk maybe a little bit about productive credits and then just, some of your work around encouraging students to register for attempting additional credit hours per term and some of those types of things as well.
So yeah, and this section was where I had a lot of fun, so to speak, because all of these factors are things that I'm constantly looking at. As it relates to the credit hour production, as you all know, probably in I think it was fall 23 and prior, our incoming students, so our FTIC or freshman class, so to speak, had about 25% of their schedule was of those students had 15 SCH or more. And so, we immediately, the question of time to degree was on the table. And so that mathematically would cause a 6.5 graduation year time to degree for students who are taking an average of 12 SCH up on entry. And so supported by data through the benchmark report from Ad Astra, the idea or concept of velocity and keeping that velocity going on was part of our conversation. And so we steadily, through changing the narrative through our advising structures, made 15 SCH the norm where students have to opt out of. So, going back to the culture piece, it was really just our culture of saying 12 is norm, 15 is you can opt in. So we reversed that and we saw that ratio in terms of 25% of our incoming students having 15 SCH jump to almost 48%. And as of today, that number is 60%. So our incoming class for fall 26, now 60% of them have 15 SCH or more. That has nothing to do with us changing any capacity other than the conversations we have with students. Now, this is all under the umbrella of a lot of change that's happening from a macro perspective. So in terms of course program of study, CPOS as it's known, students who receive aid, if they're not on their pathway, the government won't pay for it. And so that's while it can be a negative, depending on how you look at it, it can have a negative impact. From a positive perspective, in terms of keeping students on track, it allows us to have those direct conversations. The other piece, in terms of pathway alignment, is the other part where looking at what we've said we're going to offer in terms of students and their academic plan versus what actually is being offered. So that's something that's my next piece in terms of really looking at the data in terms of pathway alignment, because that's a tangible, actionable item. And so if in fact we've told students this is our course rotation, but we can show within the data that we're not honoring that to a large degree, then we can have a conversation of how we remediate that. And so I think in terms of time to degree, in terms of the velocity or the productive credits, I think these are all intertwined. And so the data helps me articulate the issue in a way that all stakeholders can understand the why behind the requests to do something different. So that's kind of where I've been putting my efforts.
Dwayne, that's really helpful. So there is a question in the chat, and you are referring to student credit hours, attempted student credit hours. So just to clarify that. And so it looks like that was handled in the chat as well, but just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Yes.
So before we turn it over to questions for the group, are there any key metrics that we haven't talked about that you all want to point out that have been very helpful to you as you've kind of gone through this process? Or are there any other points maybe that we didn't even include in the guide that have been things that you have focused on during your work?
Well, I'll just real quick. The momentum here is something key in terms of students who enter our university. That first year with math and English, it's something that we are closely monitoring, and I think we want to develop some campaign around having students, within their first year, clear these gateway courses because it unlocks so much more. And so in terms of our population, we've seen that if they have not met either one or the other, it does affect their ability to return. It does affect their momentum. And so, really having a pathway where we can see that both math and English are being cleared in that first year is critical for us. Beyond the first year, more credits earned, more momentum build, but that momentum is lost in that first year for a lot of our students. And so I think the momentum year metric and being able to have a tool that could easily show us during the enrollment cycle where we are is going to be critical for how we operate moving forward.
That's great, Dwayne. Steve, you came off mute too.
Yeah, I was going to add a little bit to what Gene said earlier. One of the ones that we're really focused on right now is the late ad, and he mentioned that, but I wanted to follow on with why we're considering that so important. It is truly an indicator of how well we've planned our schedule, and when we planned it poorly, we are adding late sections, and we're doing a lot of that at our institution historically. And then as you begin to peel back the layers, as you said, and you begin to look at root causes, for us, it's really a look at our budgeting practices, at our calendar of release of allocation of new lines. It's thinking about where those new lines are actually being given. Are they straight up replacements because somebody retired, or do we need to consider reallocating them? And we've actually worked with leadership to make big change in this area. So again, as you think about root causes, are they considering the allocation of these faculty lines that may be needed based on the demand and the late ads that we're providing? Is that a priority? Are they able to commit based on our projections of enrollments at an early enough time for us to hire? And then internally in the provost office, are we keeping track and being good stewards of our resources by not just granting faculty lines when they become vacant to that same area, but doing the due diligence of considering where they're needed and working closely with the deans on that effort, right?
So very helpful, Steve. I appreciate that. So before we turn it over to Q&A generally in just a second, I just want to scroll down a little bit here and just remind you that you can also start with a goal and be able to kind of see the metrics associated with those, some barriers, how to think about it. And so just know that there's we focus today on the metrics to examine, but notice that there's a lot of rich information available to you. Again, my favorite part is around the hypotheses. So if you have some things that you have on your campus that you want to be able to consider, these are great ways to be able to go in. And before I turn it over to Elizabeth to facilitate our discussion, my favorite feature is this concept of being able to suggest a hypothesis. So if you're sitting on there today and you have something that you want us to be able to address in this guide, please feel free to submit it. So we're excited to see what your ideas are as we go forward as well. But with that, let's turn it over to Elizabeth. I see some questions have come in, and so we can just facilitate that discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, I think Samantha and I are going to tag team, but I will flag a couple that are in the chat. So the first one I promised would get flagged was, has anyone successfully integrated instructional cost data into their analyses? For example, incorporating the cost of offering overloaded sections so academic units can evaluate the trade-offs between paying overloads versus reassigning existing faculty to meet demand. I see head nodding.
So I'm going to not answer your question, but answer a different one that I can answer. We've not done that cost analysis, but we have looked at the health of the departments, right? So taking that deep dive into considering where there might be need for additional capacity. But I'm going to add a different cost to this conversation. That's the cost of doing overloads, because that's something that we have experienced. We've done a lot of overloads recently. We're a very lean institution. And an additional cost beyond the financial is the mental health cost on the faculty. And we've seen that impact realized. We've seen faculty become burnt out. And unfortunately, I think many faculty, either real or perceived, are underpaid, right? And feel that way and feel the pressure to add course assignments when they can, when they're offered. And so have to be mindful of that kind of cost also. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I'll add, just this morning, we have one more orientation, and the faculty was speaking with me saying the advisor's call asking for seats. And while this faculty increased capacity, not open a new section, she said, the struggle I have is balancing a section with 14 students versus I've increased the capacity and then you have another section with 30. And so from an equity perspective, how do I handle that? And we have an interim provost, and one of her charges, or one of the things she'd be looking at, is really workload policy. And I think there has to be a proactive or some conversation ahead to work that out, whatever that will look like. So if and when you do get to that bridge, there is a mathematical way for it to be handled rather than a reactionary. So, we haven't done it, as Steve said, but there is a conversation about workload policy, because if we don't address that, and when we get to these spaces, the faculty or the chair struggles between those two areas, meeting the student need while taking care of their faculty from an equity or from just a fair perspective.
So I want to add just one thing. So we have done quite a few financial analyses around instructional costs. And one of the things that I would challenge you to think through as well are there some situations where you're offering some courses that are underutilized? So we didn't talk a lot about that today. We did talk a little bit about course cancellations, but oftentimes there are some things in your schedule that you're offering that maybe you don't need. And so as we've worked with institutions, we've seen situations where they're paying overloads for certain faculty while there are other faculty that are available that could teach some of those sections. When we were just at the AASCU summer meeting, we had a great case study story from an institution that mentioned they had 19% adjunct savings by looking at some of this data more closely and being able to think through that. And so I encourage you to not just look at the overloads, but look at the schedule as a whole, and try to determine, are there some opportunities there that maybe you aren't aware of before you are kind of thinking about the trade-offs associated specifically with overloads as well.
We have another question in our Q&A. So this one is from Nina. I work with a lot of CTE programs. Our CTE faculty disagree with the taking of math and English in the first year. For them, getting students jobs in the industry can be more important than the students earning a credential. Can you speak to this? Does Momentum Year look different for CTE programs? Is there research out there focused on CTE? So Laura, I wonder if you might start and then let the other panelists chime in.
So sure. So we've definitely heard, and we can disaggregate the data at times between CTE programs and more of the traditional college transfer programs. And we do have the hard part is that it's often not the same courses that you're looking at across programs from a CTE. But what we have found is that we have a metric that's associated with full momentum year that is not just about momentum year English and math, but it's about getting 9 credits within their program pathway. And so that feels like something from a CTE perspective that could be used a little bit more effectively. Oftentimes the CTE programs are a little bit more lockstep depending on what those are. And so would be happy to follow up with you in a little bit more detail. But I think you're pointing out something that's really, really important, that we do need to treat those populations a little bit differently. I don't know of any external research that I've seen recently on that particular topic, but I think it's a great thing for us to consider. Anyone else want to respond on CTE?
We had a comment in the chat from Catherine. We've leaned heavily into using waitlists to help us show where the deficits in seat planning might be. Has anyone done any research on seeing what happens when a waitlisted student doesn't get their course?
Well, I can speak personally to what happens when a college-age student in my house doesn't get a waitlist course, and there's a lot of chaos that ensues. I don't know that I have a lot of published data available specifically on wait lists and what does that mean? You saw some of the quoted things within the guidebook about if a student doesn't have access to the course, a certain percentage of them end up not registering for anything in that term. I think everyone on this call knows that I have a love-hate relationship with waitlist anyway, because to some of the things that Dwayne mentioned, it's hard to know exactly what is the waitlist data signaling. Is it signaling a demand issue? Is it signaling preferences for instructors or days and times or modalities? So I don't know that I have a lot of great data to send your way, but I think certainly one thing that I would encourage is as you're going through that process, a lot of institutions end up kind of purging the wait list at a certain point in time, and so sometimes that means that data disappears. So if you're interested in doing more of a deep dive into what happens with those students on the wait list, I encourage you as step one, keep that data to be able to figure out what might be happening. But certainly, Catherine, happy to have a follow-up conversation as well. And it looks like maybe Tyler is responding in the chat as well.
Mm-hmm. And Dwayne, you came off mute. Would you like to say something before we move to wrap up?
Sure. So I think that with waitlists, my suggestion or my thought is the institution has to decide how the wait list is going to be used for them, and its value. We've asked that question regarding what happens, and the data gets dumped. We use Banner, and after a certain point, it's like it never happened, and or either person actually saved the last date before it got dumped, to do some post analysis in terms of what happens to those students. And in some cases, the students, they just move on to something else, whether whether that equates to a delay or in their graduation time. We haven't gone that far, but I suspect that the students will just try to figure it out, and the issue remains hidden. I mean, the issue comes up on the wait list if it's an issue, but then it falls off and then it's like it never happened. And so I think for us, it's how can we use the waitlist to show or to help us understand student behaviors or what students are thinking. So that's kind of my view.
Yeah, I think I'll just add real quickly to what Dwayne said and say that it's one metric, right? And I think that's the challenge. You can't rely on any one single metric, so you need to dig deeper and kind of try and figure out what that waitlist data is suggesting to you. We've had a similar issue of purging our waitlist, and that simple solution of grabbing it right before it's purged, and it's purged so that students can have an open registration period right before that registration cycle ends. So we're just beginning to dig in and ask those same questions. I'd be interested to hear what other people find.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to hand it back over to Lisa to do our wrap up and give you some next steps.
Thanks, Samantha. Yeah, I just want to share, Elizabeth posted this in the chat. We have our last webinar and our last resource coming out on September 3rd. So if you're not registered, please do get registered and explore the rest of the website, because the resources that we released on the previous two webinars, the case making tools and the faculty and student feedback resources that Laura referenced earlier are on the website. Please take advantage of them. We'll be following up. If you registered for, obviously you did register, you're here, so you'll get the recording and the link to the resource in a follow-up email. If you need to use this recording to help start a conversation on your campus, you're more than welcome. Same thing with the tools. Use them and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll hope to see you again on September 3rd. Laura, thank you so much for pouring your heart and soul into the data guide. It's incredible. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your talent and brilliance in helping it come to life. And to Jean, Steve, and Dwayne, thank you for helping us see how it can be a valuable tool on our campuses. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.